The search and rescue lights sweep across the snow like slow-moving lighthouses. At first, you think they're looking for something ordinary. A dropped pack, a missed turn, a set of keys buried under powder. Then the beam catches the shape of a body. Not far from a road. Not far from warmth. It's the kind of scene that makes you argue with reality, because it doesn't match the world we think we live in. A world of insulated jackets thick as spacesuits, GPS in every pocket, outdoor stores on every highway. And yet the cold doesn't care what you paid. It only cares what you did, minute by minute, while it was taking your heat away. I want to start with that uneasy contrast. Not for shock value, but because it's familiar. Americans love the outdoors. We love the belief that the right gear equals safety. We love the clean equation: prepare, pack, go. But the backcountry doesn't run on slogans, and winter especially runs on physics. So let's go back, far back, to the 1830s, into the Rocky Mountains, where the margins were so thin you could hear them tearing. Picture a mountain man, one of the trappers and scouts who moved through high country when maps were guesses and help was measured in days, not minutes. No synthetic insulation, no weather forecast, no headlamp with spare batteries, just animal hides, wool, simple tools, and a level of attention modern life rarely demands. Here's the question that refuses to let go. If people today can be undone by cold within sight of safety, how did those men survive nights that would dismantle a modern campsite in an hour? To understand that, you have to stop thinking of cold as bad weather and start seeing it as a methodical force with a plan. Cold doesn't rush. It works in steps, and it takes your heat in 4 primary ways. The first is the ground. Snow looks soft, but it's a heat sink. Sit in the wrong place, kneel too long, or lie directly on frozen earth, and it will pull warmth from you steadily, like money draining from an account you forgot to check. People assume air is the enemy. Often, it's what's beneath you. The second is wind. Wind doesn't need drama to be lethal. It doesn't have to howl. A steady breeze is enough to peel away the thin layer of warm air your body builds around itself. It turns cool into biting, and biting into clumsy fingers and narrow judgment. Cold doesn't have to overpower you. It only has to make you careless. The third is the open sky. On clear nights especially, your body bleeds heat upward. You feel it when you step out from tree cover into an open meadow and the temperature seems to drop for no visible reason. That isn't imagination. It's the vast, dark sky above you pulling warmth away. Shelter isn't just about blocking wind. It's about breaking that exposure to the open night. And the fourth, quietest of all, is moisture. Not the storm that soaks you, but the sweat you create yourself. This is where confidence becomes a trap. You hike hard to stay warm. You overdress to be safe. You push, you sweat, and your clothing turns damp. Then you stop, because you've reached a ridge, or you're making camp, or you just need a moment. Suddenly the cold isn't weather anymore. It's intimate. Wet fabric steals heat far faster than dry. And what felt like smart effort becomes a mistake that keeps charging interest. The mountain men didn't survive because they were made of something stronger than us. They survived because they respected these 4 forces and built their lives around them. They insulated from the ground. They broke the wind. They managed their exposure. And they treated moisture as an enemy that came from the inside as much as the outside. The modern world teaches us to buy solutions. The old world taught them to manage problems. So as we go on, hold 2 images in your mind. One is a person in expensive gear, close to safety, undone by the most basic force on earth. The other is a trapper in rough country, watching the wind, watching his breath, watching the snow under his boots, making decisions that look small, until you understand that those decisions are the difference between a hard night and a night you never come back from. By the time the sun slips behind the ridge, clothing stops being about comfort and starts being about control. Not control over the weather, you never get that, but control over what happens inside your own layers. In the 1830s, a mountain man didn't carry a wardrobe. He carried a system, and he used it the way a good hand uses tools, deliberately, attentively, and with constant adjustment. What surprises most people is this. The goal was never to stay as warm as possible every minute of the day. The goal was to stay dry and steady. Overheat while moving and you sweat. Sweat soaks your clothing. And damp clothing, in real cold, can turn an ordinary pause into a dangerous one. That lesson shows up again and again in journals and first-hand accounts of frontier travel. Manage your heat while you work, so you can keep your warmth when you stop. Everything started with the base layer. Wool was common for a reason. It holds warmth even when it isn't perfectly dry, and it breathes, something that matters when you're climbing, hauling, or building camp. A mountain man might wear a wool shirt and wool leggings, or long underwear when he had access to it. Fit mattered. Too tight, and it restricted movement while trapping moisture. Too loose and cold air slipped through the gaps. Next came the wind layer. Buckskin, softened deer hide, wasn't magic, but it did several critical jobs well. It blocked wind better than plain cloth and stood up to hard use. In brush, against rock, around tools, it lasted. It also handled sparks and light snow better than many woven fabrics. But buckskin had a weakness. Once soaked, it grew heavy and could stiffen as it dried in cold air. That meant you didn't treat it like rain gear. You treated it like a shield and worked to keep it dry. Then came the outer layer for true cold, a heavy wool coat or capote. This is the piece people picture when they imagine a trapper in winter. But even this wasn't the answer by itself. It was part of a system. A heavy coat traps warm air, blocks wind, and stabilizes your temperature over long hours outside. But worn wrong, it could make you sweat fast during hard movement. That's where experience showed. Skilled mountain men adjusted constantly. While breaking trail, cutting wood, or climbing, they vented heat early. They opened their coats, loosened belts, pushed up sleeves, or pulled off a hat for a few minutes. To an outsider, it might look careless. It wasn't. They were protecting their dry layers. Once you're already sweating, you're behind. When movement slowed or stopped, the process reversed, quickly. Close the coat, raise the collar, tighten cuffs, put the hat back on, cover the neck, pull on mittens. In cold weather, small openings matter. Heat leaks fastest at the neck, wrists, and ankles. A simple scarf or neck cloth could mean the difference between staying warm and losing ground. So could tying down loose sleeves or tucking layers properly. Hands and feet were treated as high priority because they did the work. Wool socks helped, and many men carried extra pairs because wet socks were trouble waiting to happen. Footwear varied, moccasins, boots, overshoes, but the rule stayed the same. Keep feet as dry as possible, protect them from wind, and avoid sweating into your insulation. If your feet started getting hot while moving, you slowed down before you soaked them. There's a modern belief that more layers always mean more safety. The older approach was sharper. The right layers, used at the right moments, kept you alive. Too much insulation during hard work could be as dangerous as too little when you stopped. A mountain man's clothing system wasn't fashion. It was a daily discipline: vent, seal, check, adjust. So the cold never found an easy way in. You can own the warmest coat on earth and still lose the night if you can't build a small, steady fire. In deep cold, fire isn't a luxury and it isn't a pastime. It's the one tool that can change your situation fast. It dries damp layers, warms hands that won't work, melts snow into water, and gives you a place to steady your mind when the wind won't let up. Mountain men knew that. They treated fire-making like a duty, not a party trick. When I read the old accounts, what stands out isn't bravado. It's plain practicality. They didn't assume a fire would happen just because they needed one. They planned for the moment it would be hardest, when the world around them was wet, their fingers stiff, and daylight bleeding out. They carried what worked in that era: flint and steel and a small bundle of charcloth, slow-catching fabric that holds a spark long enough for it to become flame. It wasn't quick like a modern lighter, but in practiced hands, it was dependable. And practice mattered, because cold makes small problems grow teeth. Drop your tinder and the snow can swallow it. Let your hands shake and your best tool suddenly feels useless. So they built habits that reduced mistakes. The point wasn't to look impressive. The point was to make sure the first spark wasn't also the last chance. They also understood something we forget when we carry one primary tool and call it good: redundancy. In their world, relying on a single method was a gamble. Steel can be lost. Flint can break. Charcloth can get damp. So they carried backups, not just another copy of the same thing, but another way to reach the same result. Extra tinder in a protected pouch. Dry shavings kept close to the body. Knowledge of what natural materials would still catch after bad weather. When your life depends on heat, you don't plan for the best day. You plan for the day everything goes wrong. Halfway through this research, I had to stop for a moment, because it quit feeling like history and started feeling personal. Years ago, on a winter hike back home, I watched a kid in another group, teenage, confident, wearing a brand new jacket, start to panic when the wind rose and his hands went numb. Nothing terrible happened, but I saw the instant confidence turns into fear. An adult with them pulled everyone under a stand of trees, got them out of the wind, and warmed hands one by one. Then that adult did something I still remember. They took off their own warm gloves and handed them over first, even though it meant their own hands would be exposed for a while. It was a quiet moral choice. Help now and accept the discomfort yourself, or protect your own comfort and hope the other person figures it out. In that moment, the choice was obvious. That same choice shows up in frontier stories too, even when nobody spells it out as a lesson. A mountain man alone could keep moving and stay warm through motion. But if he came across someone struggling, an inexperienced traveler, a partner slowed by cold, a camp that couldn't coax a flame to life, he faced the same question. Do you share your dry tinder and risk running short later? Do you stop early and burn precious fuel to get everyone stable, even if it costs you miles? The cold doesn't grade intentions. It only measures outcomes. And still, again and again, the records point to men who stopped, who shared, who built a fire not just to survive, but to bring someone else back to clear thinking. That's why fire-making was treated as non-negotiable. It wasn't only about warmth, it was about regaining control. Once a flame is going, decisions get better. Hands work better. Small tasks become possible again. Tying knots, setting shelter, preparing food, checking gear. Without fire, every mistake stacks on the next. So when we talk about mountain men and winter survival, we're not talking about romance or legend. We're talking about a hard rule they lived by. Carry the means to make fire, protect it, back it up, and never assume you'll get a second easy chance. A good fire begins long before the first spark. It begins with what you notice while you're still walking. Mountain men were always reading the country for fuel, even when their minds were on trapping, scouting, or moving camp. In winter, you don't wait until you're cold and worn down to start looking. You look early, while your hands still work and daylight still gives you choices. They learned fast that wood is a lie. Some wood lights quick and burns quick. Some fights you at the start, then pays you back with steady heat and solid coals. In the Rockies, softwoods like pine, fir, and spruce were common. They catch easily, especially when you find dry, resin-heavy pieces, good for getting the first flame going. But they can burn down faster than you expect. Harder woods, when you can find them, tend to leave coals that last. Along rivers and in lower country, you might get cottonwood or other hardwoods. In certain places, birch bark is famous because it will take a flame even when the world feels damp. The trees change by region, but the principle stays the same. Choose wood for the job you need it to do. The best fuel often wasn't what was lying on the ground. In winter, downed branches can be buried, soaked, or ruined by melt and refreeze. Mountain men hunted for standing dead, trees that had died but remained upright. Because they weren't resting on wet earth, the wood inside could stay dry long after everything else had turned heavy and spongy. They also checked beneath thick evergreen boughs where snow and rain couldn't reach as easily, and they paid attention to sound and weight. Dry wood feels lighter, and when you knock two pieces together, it tends to ring sharp instead of thudding dull. None of it is perfect, but it stacks the odds your way. Once they had fuel, they didn't build in the open unless they had to. Wind steals heat, and it makes a fire waste itself. So they looked for natural cover, a rock face, a shallow dip, a stand of trees that broke the breeze. If they could, they cleared down to mineral soil, because a fire sitting on snow is a fire sitting on future water. In deep winter, even a small platform of dry sticks could keep a newborn flame from being smothered by wet ground. Then came the part that feels almost like engineering. They shaped the fire to match the night. If you just pile wood and strike a spark, you get a brief burst, then a problem. You're scrambling for fuel right when you're tired. Mountain men tried not to fall into that trap. One method was the long fire, a line of fuel fed from the ends, building a steady wall of heat instead of a quick flare. If a simple shelter was nearby, they set the fire parallel to it so more warmth washed over the resting place. And when they could, they built a reflector behind the fire, logs, packed snow, even rocks, so heat bounced back toward them instead of vanishing into the dark. The materials were rough. The purpose wasn't. For long hours, coals mattered more than flames. Flames look impressive, but coals do the real work. A fire that builds a bed of coals can keep warming you while consuming less wood. So they often started with small pieces to establish the burn, then added thicker fuel in a way that let it break down into coals instead of flashing and fading. Once they had a good coal bed, they could bank the fire, arrange larger pieces so the heat held longer and the fire didn't eat through everything at once. They managed fuel like a supply, not like a pile. Before sleep, they staged wood within reach, because walking around in darkness and wind wastes heat and time. Tinder and small kindling stayed protected, sometimes tucked inside clothing where body warmth helped keep it dry. And they stayed disciplined about smoke. A smoky fire usually means damp fuel or poor airflow, and it can foul a shelter fast. They adjusted the layout until it burned cleaner. What I keep coming back to is this. It wasn't only about warmth. It was about staying steady. A well-built fire gives you more than heat. It gives light for tasks, hot water for the body, and the quiet sense that the night can be managed. Mountain men didn't trust one big blaze to save them. They trusted careful choices made early, then repeated, day after day. So the cold never got an easy advantage. The final lesson the mountain men learned had nothing to do with what they carried on their backs. It had everything to do with what they carried inside their bodies. In real cold, you can do everything right on the outside. Good layers, solid shelter, a steady fire, and still drift into danger if your body runs out of fuel. Warmth isn't only something you wear, it's something you generate. They understood the body the way you understand a working stove. Heat has to come from somewhere. In winter, that source is food, and not just any food. Light snacks might fill your stomach, but they don't always give you the kind of energy that keeps your core steady through long, cold hours. That's where the old accounts become very practical. Journals and frontier records show a clear preference for calorie-dense foods, dried meat, fat, and compact mixtures designed to carry a lot of energy in a small space. Pemmican is one of the best-known examples. Lean meat, dried and pounded, mixed with rendered fat, sometimes with berries. It wasn't pleasant or fancy, but it worked. It delivered slow, steady energy when the cold was constantly pulling heat away. Fat mattered because it carried calories efficiently. In freezing conditions, your body can burn through fuel just trying to hold temperature. If you don't replace that energy, the cold starts winning quietly. You slow down. Your thinking narrows. You stop doing the small things that keep you stable. Changing damp socks, tightening shelter lines, gathering the next armload of wood before dark. This is how full stomach, empty fuel happens. You can eat plenty and still run out of usable energy. Timing mattered too. Mountain men didn't wait until they felt weak. They ate before long pushes and again before resting. A hot drink or warm broth wasn't just comfort. It was calories and hydration delivered together. Water mattered more than people realized. Cold air dries you out. You lose moisture with every breath. If you don't drink, your body works harder and stays colder. Melting snow, keeping a pot going, and paying attention to thirst were part of the same system as fire and clothing. But the deeper lesson isn't about diet. It's about mindset. Modern life trains us to trust equipment first. We check forecasts, pack the newest gear, charge our phones, and assume we're covered. Those are good habits, but they can create a quiet danger. We start believing the gear will think for us. Mountain men didn't have that luxury. They survived by paying attention, hour after hour. They watched for sweat. They watched wind shifts. They watched the sky. They watched how fast wood burned. They watched each other for early signs of trouble because one person slipping could cost the whole camp time, heat, and safety. What runs through all of these lessons is humility. Not fear, humility. The kind that says, I might be wrong, so I'll check again. The kind that says, I'll stop now and fix the small problem before it becomes a big one. That isn't panic. And it isn't overconfidence. It's discipline. If there's one thing to carry away from all of this, let it be this. Cold weather survival is almost never one dramatic moment. It's a chain of small decisions. Insulate from the ground. Break the wind. Stay dry. Keep the fire reliable. Choose the right wood. Eat real fuel. Drink water. Adjust your layers. Do it early. Then do it again. And here's the part that stays with me. This knowledge isn't old because it's outdated. It's old because it was earned, again and again, by people who couldn't afford to ignore reality. If you know someone who hikes, hunts, camps, drives rural roads, or works outside in winter, pass this on. These are simple ideas, but they can change how a person thinks when the temperature drops and the margin gets thin. Because the cold is still the cold. The difference is whether we remember what to do about it.